Hello, I'm Julia, and today we're going to talk about common trap answers on the GMAT verbal section. Because there are a lot of trap answer styles, depending on the question type, we're going to focus on questions that ask you to weaken the argument in this video. In order to effectively weaken an argument, you'll need to attack the author's assumptions. If you're not familiar with assumptions, I have a couple of videos explaining what they are and how to find them, so feel free to check those out. I'm going to go through each of the common traps you might run into in a weaken the argument question, and then I have an example that has several of them illustrated. Let's proceed. Let's go through the most common trap answers you're likely to encounter in weaken questions. Answers that strengthen the conclusion. These do the opposite of what we're trying to do. For instance, if the argument said that exercise improved mental health because it releases endorphins, then a trap might say something about how endorphins are shown to significantly enhance mood and reduce stress, thereby strengthening the argument. Pseudo-weakeners, answers that appear to weaken the argument, but actually don't. These will introduce info that might seem relevant, but is ultimately irrelevant or neutral. If the argument said that daily meditation reduces anxiety levels, then a trap like this might say that some people meditate in groups and some people prefer to meditate alone. It doesn't really help us either way. Answers that weaken support for a close but alternative conclusion. These traps attack support for a different conclusion that may appear related, but isn't the conclusion we're trying to weaken. If the argument was about how switching to electric cars reduces carbon emissions, then the trap might be something about how electric cars are relatively expensive, which might make it less likely for people to purchase and use electric cars, but doesn't directly weaken the conclusion about the cars reducing carbon emissions. Answers that are pertinent, but ultimately incorrect. These choices may seem highly relevant, but they're actually based on an inaccurate interpretation of the argument. Say the argument was about how reducing consumption of red meat reduces the risk of heart disease. The trap could be that eating less red meat often leads to significant nutrient deficiencies that can potentially lead to health risks. Without knowing that they lead to heart disease, the argument isn't weakened. And finally, answers that appear to attack the argument's premises or supporting evidence. These traps might seem to challenge the validity of the premises, but in the GMAT, supporting evidence is always taken as true. For instance, if the argument said that a recent study showed that people who drink green tea live longer, then a trap might say that the study only surveyed people in urban areas. It seems to critique the study's methodology, but it doesn't directly weaken the argument. Let's look at an example with a few of these traps. Companies that adopt a 4-day work week will see an increase in employee productivity because employees experience less stress and fatigue. A recent study of companies across various industries showed that companies that operate on a 4-day work week report significantly higher overall productivity. The study also highlighted that employees in these companies were less likely to take sick days compared to those working a traditional 5-day schedule. Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? We're going to look through each of these answer choices individually. A. Employees in 4-day workweek companies report higher satisfaction levels than those in traditional schedules. If anything, this strengthens the argument by adding that employees self-report higher job satisfaction levels. B. The reduced workweek leads to increased overtime demands, offsetting any gains in in employee restfulness. This is pertinent, but it's incorrect. It doesn't directly weaken the argument. Increased overtime demands could be relevant, but they don't necessarily prove that productivity isn't increased in 4-day workweek situations. C. Companies that adopted flexible hour policies reported higher productivity than those with fixed 4-day work weeks. This is a pseudo-weakener. It proposes a different plan, which might be better than the 4-day workweek the argument discusses, suggesting flexible hours yield better results, introduces a comparative point, but it does not refute the link between the 4-day workweek and productivity. D. Studies suggest that stress and fatigue are not the primary factors affecting employee productivity. This seems to attack the supporting evidence. While questioning whether stress and fatigue are the primary drivers of productivity challenges part of the reasoning, it doesn't directly disprove the main conclusion that productivity increases under a 4-day workweek. Employees in companies that adopted the 4-day workweek showed no significant change in overall productivity compared to those same companies with a 5-day schedule. This is the correct answer. The choice shows that while companies that utilize a 4-day workweek might have higher average productivity, companies that move from a 5-day workweek to a 4-day workweek show no such improvements. Therefore, the conclusion that adopting a 4-day workweek will lead to an increase in productivity is weakened. Keep an eye out for these common traps, and you can reduce your likelihood of falling for an incorrect answer and boost your GMAT verbal score. See you next time.